Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Cooks by Carrie. If you're new here, I'm Carrie, and for today's Foodie Friday video, I'm sharing how to make this delicious apple galette recipe courtesy of Broma Bakery. Without further ado, let's get into the video. For today's recipe, you're going to need flour, sugar, salt, unsalted butter, which is cold and cut into cubes, ice water, apple, sugar, cinnamon, 4 tablespoons of butter, also cut into small cubes, egg wash, and vanilla ice cream for serving. Now, if you're like Carrie, I don't see any flour or a lot of sugar or salt. Those first 5 ingredients are for the dough. So you could follow her dough recipe, or you could use my favorite pie dough recipe, which is what I use. I will link it in the description down below. But that is it for today's recipe. So to start off this recipe, you want to peel, core, and thinly slice your apples, as thin as you can get. You can even go thinner than what I did. So I'm just showing here how to do it with one apple. So I don't have a core, and I assume that probably most people don't have one. So basically how I do it is I just cut along the edges, so 2 big halves and then 2 smaller like sides, I guess. And then from there I just thinly slice it. You want to use a sharp knife for this cuz believe it or not, you actually tend to get hurt less with a sharper knife than you do with a duller knife. Now, I think it's more because, like, with a duller knife, you might have to work harder to get the same result as a sharp knife. So that might be it. And here is another good tip to help you practice your knife skills. When you get to that last little thin piece, try and just put your hands on top of it. Don't actually have a finger holding onto the apple because you don't want to cut your finger. And also make sure that it's kind of, I don't practice the best skills here, but you kind of want to put your knuckles in so that if the knife was to slice down on you, it wouldn't hit you. It would just like tap your knuckles. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're a newer chef or you don't feel completely comfortable with a knife like this, just make sure to have another person around just in case, maybe to give you some pointers or just to watch you to make sure nothing goes wrong. But anyway, you just want to continue slicing the apples thinly, just like this, until you're all done. Now it's time to roll out the pie dough. You're going to grab some extra flour and roll it out. You want it to be about a 12-inch circle. Mine was kind of more like an oval, but I think anything like that is fine. And then you're going to go ahead and place it on a baking tray, and then you can kind of place, they recommend a 9-inch cake pan in the center so that you know, and you press it down slightly so that you know how much not to exceed when you put down the apples. I kind of just use a bowl, so you can just use something like that. And also, if you're reading the recipe, you might be wondering, Carrie, why are you doing this step after the apples? Well, for me, I really like to have everything ready before I get that pie dough out because it's really important to have a cold pie dough because once it gets really soft, it's kind of hard to work with and it's just not a very good experience. So you want to keep the pie dough as cold as possible. Also, in this step, I do use a lot of flour. You don't have to use quite as much as me. It's just I really didn't want to stick to the surface since I had to roll it out so much. I would say in the end, maybe mine was like an eighth of an inch thick. It's not super thick, but it's also not incredibly thin. Now that I have my pie rolled out and you can see, where I made that circle, you're just going to line all the apples around it and just cover it. You want to kind of fan them out and then place them down, but you can really do them in any pattern you like. And here's where I'm going to give a little bit of my final review notes, a tiny bit. I felt like there wasn't that many apples in this dish, and I didn't use all mine because I was afraid of stacking them up, but I would really recommend using all of them and pretty much just covering them everywhere, stacking them up, because you'll see when I do my final comments at the end, but this is an apple dish, so I would have loved to have some more apples in it. Maybe it wouldn't look as pretty, but it might taste a little bit better. Alrighty guys, before I continue with this video, please subscribe, leave a thumbs up, comment down below what you'd like to see next, share this video with a friend, and please ring that notification bell so you get notified when I post a new video. Alrighty, let's get back to the video. So now, what I did here was I mixed the cinnamon with the sugar, and then I sprinkle it all over the apples, and then I fold over the edges of the galette. And also, that is such a funny word to me, like apple galette. It just sounds wrong. But I Googled just to make sure my pronunciation was correct, and Google told me it is galette. But if I am for some reason pronouncing it wrong, please let me know in the comments down below. So yeah, I just sprinkled it all over and then fold up the crust. What you actually are going to want to do is sprinkle it all over, then add the little pads of butter, then fold it up. I did sprinkle, fold, then butter, but just try and do it the first way I suggested it. So, on another note, some of you guys might be wondering, Carrie, why are you making an apple dessert video when it is no longer fall? Well, it is still, I think, apple season. I mean, at least to me, the apples aren't, maybe they're a little smaller, but I mean, you can still find apples. And I felt like just because Thanksgiving is over, that does not mean that I can't stop making apple things. No, my next video will not be apple related, but I felt like this was still a good video to put out there. And I had seen a video where someone made this so beautifully and it looks so delicious, so I really wanted to try it out and test it out. I'm going to give you another little hint into my final review. Is it better than an apple pie? The answer is no. Does it taste pretty similar? Yes. Was it a cool experience to make? And like, I don't know, this one part here where it's like all folded over, it just looks so beautiful to me. Even though like it's not perfect, that those like little imperfections, I feel like they make it just so much more beautiful. So I would say it was pretty fun to make, and it was definitely very easy. And this was the last step before I put it into the oven. You are going to do an egg wash, and you're mixing a little water in it. I don't really know why they suggested that. Maybe just, I mean, clearly it's to water it down, but you just want to mix it all up. And then you can do this with, like, if you don't have, I don't know how to describe it. It's a spatula that's kind of like has a bunch of almost like spaghetti looking not strings, but you know, like pieces of plastic on the bottom. You can just use a regular spatula, it just might be a little harder. But what I'm going with is this really unnecessary, fancy, it looks like a paintbrush, but it is actually a pastry brush. And I'm just brushing it all over. But any type of thing that you have like this would work. I guess, yes, technically a paintbrush might work, but make sure you've never used it on any paint or anything. But I really wouldn't recommend that. I would just recommend if you don't have the pastry brush or like the silicone type pastry brush, I would just use a spatula and kind of just brush it on. But yeah, you just want to put it all over the edges because this is what's going to make it crispy and golden brown. Now it's time to put this baby in the oven. So the oven is at 375 and you're supposed to bake this for about 30 to 40 minutes, and I believe I put mine in there for about 35. So I would just recommend checking maybe even after 25 minutes. Also, I'm sorry I forgot to mention earlier, but you do want to be at 375. I just keep my oven 10 degrees warmer just because my oven's a little bit wonky. And now it has been about 35, maybe around 40 minutes, and it looked so golden brown. I was so happy with it. Although I did feel like the cinnamon at the top didn't look super appetizing because it kind of looked burnt, but it wasn't burnt. But as you can see, it's so hot. You need to let it cool down. That butter is boiling inside of there. So just let it rest. Honestly, probably for a couple hours if you can. Or you can serve it warm. Just be careful. And after a few hours, I was ready to cut this up. So, my final thoughts, finally. So I already told you guys that it's not as good as an apple pie, which is true. It also didn't look as good as the picture. It looked pretty good, but not as good as the picture. some new notes. So it wasn't super filling. And I personally felt like, I kind of mentioned this already, but there weren't as many apples as I would have liked. There's a thick crust, which I love a crust, but there just wasn't enough apples to make that crust ratio good, or work well. So I would say if I was to make this recipe again, add more apples and maybe thin out the crust a little bit more or stretch it out a little more. But honestly, I would just go ahead and make an apple pie. I showed you how to make the mini apple pies in my last video. An apple pie isn't as hard as you think, and it tastes so good and like 10 times better than this. Not to say that this wasn't good. I mean, it was amazing, but was it as good as an apple pie? No. And that's all for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please follow me on Instagram at Cooks by Carrie. I post lots of fun photos of the food I cook. And I'll see you on Friday for a new video. Bye, guys.